r/AskReddit. Women of Reddit, what was your worst encounter with a nice guy? A boy in my friendship group at uni just wouldn't get the hint. We'd all be hanging out, and I would treat him the same as any of the other boys in our group. It got to the point he expressed interest in me, and I gently put him down, and explained I didn't see him that way. Now after this, we weren't as close for a few weeks, while I allowed him time to get over it. But over the weeks that followed we got back to where we'd always been, and I continued to treat him the same as any of my other friends. Until he expressed feelings again. Now over the course of us being friends at uni, 2 years, this cycle repeated maybe 7 or 8 times. With me getting less and less gentle each time and the reconnected friendship becoming weaker and weaker with each expression of love. I graduated now 4 years ago. The year immediately following I moved overseas, and the 3 after that I think I've seen the boys of this group maybe 5 times in total. The last time was last summer. I'm close with the girls still, and we thought it would be nice to see the boys as we hadn't in probably a year or so. The nice guy was in a relationship by this point. We weren't close at all by now, because I felt it best than to constantly have to reject him. However, on this night out he kept following me around, trying to touch me, and at one point said that he would dump his girlfriend for me as it's always been me he cared about. I'm trying to keep it light so I don't ruin the night and the reunion of old uni pals. My girlfriends are literally making a barrier around me to keep him away. The next morning I vowed to never go somewhere I knew he'd be again. How many times does a girl have to say no? I'd also just like to say that for the majority of the time I've known him, we've really not even been that close, as it was getting awkward the amount of times I'd have to tell him no. So there was definitely no actions of mine that could be misinterpreted. It's time for me to tell my story of Zacheria, the nicest nice guy. I went to an academic summer camp the summer between junior and senior year at a university I was interested in. There was about 100 people there who were broken into groups based on what classes they took in high school and where you were from. In my group there was a guy, let's call him L. Well, I didn't realize at the time, but I caught L's eye and he tried to adopt me into his group of friends from his city, including Zacheria. Now Zacheria was an R/I am very smart personality type. He thought he was so much funnier and better than most people, with an edgy taste in music and a refined taste in literature. This was all wrapped up in a lanky teen guy with a literal neckbeard. After being introduced into the group, Zacheria instantly took a liking to me, complimenting me on how much better than other girls I was. Everything I did was just so great because I knew or understood basic things and could comprehend sarcasm. After 3 days he confessed his love to me and completely believed that we were soulmates, and was shocked when I said I wasn't interested. I politely and naively told him we could stay friends if he thought he could handle it. Narrator voice: he could not. Dude went off the deep end, but he would text me obsessively detailing everything he liked about me constantly. I'm talking several long texts every hour because every little thing reminded him of me. He got an idea in his head that I liked Elle more than him. I did not, and nuked their 10-year friendship over this imaginary slight. I even remember him recounting a dream of me wearing nothing but a pink apron and being his stay-at-home fee in excruciating detail, including cute little back dimples that I don't even have. I slowly pulled away, but was anxious because we were both going into the same university the next summer through the same program, and I knew I wouldn't be able to avoid him entirely. He did back off for a bit, but only because he found her much younger, 5 years difference, so he was going to college and she would be a freshman the following year. Girl who was the same type as me. It only got worse at the university, where it came to a head when he decided to tell me off because my current boyfriend was breaking my spirit, and I turned into a cold heartless bitch. I transferred universities and now I don't hear from him anymore. My biggest experience with a nice guy was with my old DM. I was working at a place and had made some coworker friends, and they all talked about their D&D game. I mentioned in passing that I had always wanted to play, but the first time I tried, a group of guys who I was sort of friends with told me I couldn't play because I was a girl. Junior high school boys are dumb. So, the group of guys at my work offered to let me join. I was stoked. Hooray. Things started out fine. I was the only girl. Everyone got along pretty well. Then girl number 2 showed up. Finally, She was the wife of one of the other players, and I was great to have another lady. Someone else dropped out, and now we need a new player. We find girl number 3. Wonderful. This is where it all went bad. Girl number 3, calling her Daphne, and I became friends really quickly. She was sweet, funny, smart, and really fun to play with. She was also quite small and very cute. After we finished playing on her first night, the group was standing by the entrance or DM's house, all getting ready to leave, when DM starts talking. DM. So, I'm pansexual, then pointing at everyone else in the group respectively. He's straight, she's straight, he's straight, and, pointing at me, she's straight, I'm not. He's never asked me, I never told him this. What's your sexuality? Asking Daphne. Then everyone was silent for a solid 5 seconds. Like WTF. Who just asks shit like that? Me. Actually, DM, I'm not straight. Anyway, it's getting late, we should all go. I then proceeded to shuffle everyone out. So that was a super weird encounter, but it was merely the harbinger of what would destroy our group. Daphne and I became pretty good friends and started hanging out with each other outside of D&D. Such good friends, in fact, that she introduced me to her girlfriend. DM noticed that Daphne and I were getting close, so he started to take it out on my character. All of a sudden, I was getting attacked more. He would make it very difficult for my character to do anything productive, and then he ended up killing her. Not necessarily a huge deal, characters die, but she was my first, and I loved her. While he was doing this, he was also making it very hard for Daphne's character to do anything. He kept creating NPCs that would go and rescue her and profess their love for her. It was obvious to literally everyone that he had a crush on her. Oh, and at this point, everyone in the group knew Daphne was a lesbian. So, Daphne, another group member, and I started drinking before D&D. Couldn't drink at DM's cause he lived with his mom and she's Muslim. So it was a dry house, just to make DM's antics a bit more tolerable and easier to deal with. Well, one day, Daphne and I maybe got a wee bit tipsier than usual, and we were excitedly talking about something in game, and we briefly pecked each other on the mouth, cause we are friends and comfortable with each other. But oh no, DM saw. And this begins the time of my D&D playing where I would have to make a new character every 2 to 3 sessions, because DM was so jealous of my relationship with Daphne that he would kill my character any chance he got. The culmination of it all was at DM's Halloween party. I didn't go, but Daphne did. He proceeded to get her so drunk that she couldn't stand up and was attempting to cuddle with her until someone, girl number 1 from the group, brought her home. Daphne doesn't really remember this, and the only reason she knows what happened is because someone else was here watching out for her. After that we dissolved. No one was comfortable playing with RDM anymore. The other 2 girls in the group and I ended up having girls night on D&D night instead. It was much more fun. Also, Daphne married her girlfriend and the wedding was good too. A couple years ago, when I had just graduated high school, I went to work on a farm for a few days before heading on my senior trip. The farm is owned by friends of my family. My first day I had just finished driving tractor and was parked at the shop when called my boss for a ride back to my car at the house. They sent over a guy, we'll call him T, to give me a ride. For reference, T is roughly 40 years old, with a beer gut and unhealthy addiction to booze. I hopped up in his car and immediately he offered me a beer. I declined and told him I graduated 2 days ago and wasn't interested. He asked me how old I was. I told him 18. He said perfect and gave me a beer. It made me super uncomfortable, and over the next few days I tried to limit my time around TR left and went on my senior trip. Throughout the rest of the summer I received lengthy phone calls and text messages from him telling me how beautiful I was, how we were soulmates, how our time together was magical, etc. I did not respond or reply. The phone calls started to disappear during the winter, and I thought he must have gotten over it. The next summer I went out to the farm again, and he was there. He immediately gave me a big hug and told me how much he missed me. I told my bosses I was uncomfortable working with T, and they had me do other projects all summer, away from him. The texts started up again, all the same as before, as well as new ones about how I had come back to be with him. how we should run away together, etc. I began to hear rumors circulating that I had slept with T, which obviously was not true. My boyfriend actually had to step in and text T, telling him to leave me alone. I was so uncomfortable. I didn't get many texts after that happened. On my third summer at the farm, T was there and did not keep his distance like my boyfriend has asked. He immediately approached me and went on with the usual junk. I got very firm with him and told him that if he did not stop, I would take legal action against him. He got upset and sent a lengthy text message to my boss, detailing how I had led him on and how I was ruining his life. I told her my side of the story, showing her the text messages I had received. She was taken aback and fired him immediately. I didn't hear much from him after this all went down that summer. The following Christmas, he killed himself. His note mentioned me and my boss, and I've been living with the guilt for a while. Edit, spelling, grammar. I worked with him. We had an evening shift at a public library where for the last 2 hours it was just the two of us on. It's also deadly quiet, there's no reason for us to be open, honestly. After a few months of working the shift together, we got into a routine of sitting at the two information desks and emailing each other links to weird Wikipedia articles, like a competition to see who could find the weirdest one. He was mostly okay. He had the whole weeaboo thing going, which got tedious at times, but he pulled his weight at close, which many of my past colleagues on that shift had not done, and was generally pleasant. So then one day he brought me a rose and asked me to the Japanese film festival a local cinema was putting on. I said that wouldn't be very appropriate given that I was married, and he sulked and stomped and spent the rest of the evening muttering about you be fucking nice to girls and this is what you get. But he knew I was married. There was a period where my car was caught in a hailstorm and was being repaired that took 2 weeks. During that time my husband came and picked me up from work. Also, our friendly interactions were limited to work talk and emailing Wikipedia articles about weird deep water fish or tiny national parks, so I don't know how he got she's interested from that. The next few months were just shitty on that shift because he sulked and moped and banged books around and stopped doing anything on clothes despite it actually being his job. Then he went to Japan to teach English, and now I work this shift with a different guy who doesn't bring me flowers or make things awkward or interpret talk about system upgrades as flirting. Also he brings Uno cards, so winner. Had a guy friend who was crushing hard on me. I was married at the time, although it was on the rocks, so I told him it wasn't happening. Then the divorce process started and he figured he was in like Flynn. After the finalization I did agree to a couple of dates, but realized early in that I wasn't feeling it at all. Partly because, I'd just gotten out of a shitty ass marriage. I told him I wasn't on the same page, and he had a hissy. I can't believe you aren't giving me a real chance after I've waited so long for you, and I would treat you so much better than your ex, but you won't even allow me the opportunity to show you. His perspective seemed to be that, because he liked me, I needed to give him a shot, regardless of my own feelings. I held my ground and said we could be friends or we could be former friends. Nothing else. He decided friends was good enough. A while later he had to have medical testing done and would be in the hospital overnight under observation. He admitted to me he was petrified and asked me to keep him company to help calm his nerves. His family all lived 2 states away, so I agreed to come sit with him. I brought a book and read aloud to him. We watched some TV, chatted. I finally went home around 1 a.m. The next day he called to tell me that the testing had gone well and that his result was good. I congratulated him and made getting off the phone noises, but he said, "So now are we more than just friends, right?" It would seem that he believed that, because I spent the evening with him at the hospital, that I must have feelings for him. I explained that what I'd done for him, I would have done for pretty much any of my friends who needed it. I then said that maybe trying to stay friends wasn't such a good idea. He said, "You can't do this to me right after a trauma. I've been through hell. You need to at least try being my girlfriend for a month." I don't remember exactly what the testing was at the hospital, but it involved a nurse coming in every hour or so to check something. I'd leave the room for it to give him privacy. When I'd returned he didn't appear particularly traumatized. Somehow our every interaction made him more and more unattractive to me. After a while I didn't even want to be friends with him anymore. I had met this guy at a friend's summer barbecue, and he was a lot of fun. We had mutual friends and he seemed like a fun guy, so we traded contact info before I headed home and added each other on Facebook the next day. At first it was pretty normal. Since we shared a lot of common interests we talked about that, and we'd message each other throughout the day. But then he got weird. Like really rapidly. When I mentioned how awful my roommates were he said he had a couch and I could always move in with him. This was after only a couple of weeks of knowing each other. Without even getting a response from me, either negative or positive, he started concocting some scenario where I'd walk around his place in my underwear and leave my bras draped over the TV. It's like he had some kind of fantasy already planned out. That's just one example I remember, but he did it all the time. Eventually it got to be too much. He would take any topic and make it sexual, usually about me or the two of us, and talking to him became so frustrating that I started avoiding him. I didn't answer his texts or his messages on Facebook for about a week. Then one day he asked me what he had done, and I figured he deserved the truth, so I told him. I said I had never given him any indication that I was interested, never once responded positively to his little daydream scenarios, and I was really tired of him making everything about trying to talk me into sex. He apologized. I was actually really glad to get it out in the open, and I wanted to move on with our friendship. He made it about 24 whole hours before he did it again. He wasn't even subtle about it. Something about whatever I said making him want to be dirty. I said bye, blocked him on everything, and never spoke to him again. When I was 20, a friend of mine tried to set me up with a friend of hers. He's so nice / etc. We talked online a couple of times. He seemed okay, not exactly my type, but my friend assured me he was perfect for me, so I figured I'd give it a shot. It's worth noting that he wouldn't send me a picture. We talked on the phone once or twice, so I didn't think too much of it, and it was 2004 so maybe he was new to the internet and didn't have a photo. We agreed to meet at a public location, his work. I walked in and saw what had to be the most unattractive man I've ever seen. Not just regular everyday ugly, but Quasimodo ugly. He smelled bad and has awful teeth. I had somewhere to be, so I politely excused myself and went to meet another friend. This guy called me later that evening to talk about going out, and I gently, politely declined. Immediately, he told my friend I was a horrible bitch and led him on. She took his side, and it ended the friendship. I soon started dating someone I'd known for a while and had lots of things in common with. That relationship ran its course and my life moved on. 2 entire years later, I'm working at a hotel and my boss sends me on an errand to a big box store with a company credit card. I was an authorized user, and company membership card, which I was also authorized to use. My coworker and I got in line to check out, and who is the cashier? This guy. I recognized him. It was a small town, and I didn't think he recognized me. I'd lost weight, changed my hair, and was dressed very professionally. I went to pay for the order and he pretended that the card was declined, and then tried to confiscate it. He threatened to call his manager and started to insinuate that I had stolen it. I was 22 and pretty easily intimidated, so I just left the store. My former friend, a woman, sent a message to me later. Nice guy said he saw you at his work. How does it feel to get rejected? He was so nice, and you just threw away this great nice guy. TL. Doctor, got catfished, rejected the person, only to be intimidated and menaced at years after the fact. Applicable repost. This isn't the worst, but probably one of the nuttiest. I spent my teens and early 20s in an interracial relationship, where our particular combination wasn't very common at the time, shortly relevant. When I was 17 to 19, I worked at a coffee shop in a busy mall a few blocks from the building where I lived, and my favorite place to get lunch/dinner during my break was health food convenience store a few doors down. The cashier at this store was a hipstery guy in his late 20s or early 30s who was the same ethnicity as my boyfriend, which I knew because they struck up a conversation about it when my boyfriend joined me for lunch there once. I also want to point out here that the cashier was second generation and thoroughly Americanized, so I don't believe that what follows is indicative of his growing up with different cultural norms. And my boyfriend immigrated to the US during high school and didn't think any of this was normal. The cashier from there on out started being exceptionally intense around me. At first this was stuff like staring and making excessive eye contact during all transactions, trying to predict what I was going to eat based on what my last several purchases had been, and coming out from behind the counter to help me select my lunch, which meant standing in front of the case and very slowly examining containers of food while narrating his explanations of why each container was better or worse while obstructing my way out of the store. He then would ring me up really slowly while telling me how much he liked my hair, or how interesting it was that I wore a skirt with my coffee shop uniform while none of the other women did, and how unique it made me. This came up a number of times. It was basically stuff that made me uneasy, but wasn't overtly creepy enough for me to give up my lunch spot right away. I had giant, curly, unnaturally colored hair that a lot of people still comment on, even now that it's a natural color. He also found my MySpace the early 2000s and added me, which should have been more alarming at the time, since he didn't know my last name. I have a pretty unusual first name, but for him to find me, he probably had to look through 100 profiles. I also used to actively blog on my MySpace, and he started sending me these long rambling messages in response to everything I posted. I guess my denial was as deep as my love of the avocado salad at the shop, because I kept going there, even though he was a weirdo. Then one day he told me he had seen me walking with my boyfriend and he asked me if I liked going out with guys of his ethnicity. I told him I liked going out with my boyfriend. He asked if I would go out with him, to which I reminded him that we were literally talking about my boyfriend in the previous sentence. He then basically pounded the counter with his fist and said, "Jesus, can't you just fucking hang out with someone who isn't your boyfriend?" Really angrily, which prompted me to decide to start making my own lunch. Then the cashier started coming to my coffee shop every day, even though the shop where he worked had far superior and free for him coffee. He would just look at me with this bovine dead-eyed stare the whole time, and if I was cashiering, he would let other people in line go ahead of him until he got to my register, rather than let another person ring him up. If I was making drinks, he would make a point to take a huge slurping sip while maintaining eye contact after I handed him his drink. At one point he asked me why I wasn't coming back to his store anymore, while my somewhat sexist manager, who was in the midst of a bitter divorce, was working with me. I said something along the lines of trying to save money, and the cashier told me he would bring me free food, which I refused for several days before he stopped because, as he told me, his manager saw him and he hoped I appreciated the risk he had taken. He also started hanging out on the patio and scribbling in his notebook while I was working. One day he left a piece of paper behind accidentally. He came back asking for it later, and I denied all knowledge of it, which had a terrible love poem about a crimson-haired siren with a lot of sketches of a girl who looked like me. If my coffee shop uniform had been designed by Rob Liefeld, and if I had huge tits/long legs, I don't. He left behind more poems over the course of a year, none of which I never acknowledged, so he started messaging them to me on MySpace, which I also didn't acknowledge. Things were then complicated by the fact that my boyfriend and I actually broke up for reasons unrelated to this great guy, but his mother didn't approve of me, and I was tired of sneaking around after 6 years together. Cashier dude picked up on this because my boyfriend wasn't around and went into hyperdrive. He'd send me a message on MySpace daily. One time I walked by the shop where he worked with my friends, and he left the counter and ran out to yell after me while his manager yelled at him to come back in. Once I got a series of angry messages about how he had been playing my favorite band in the store and had been reprimanded for it, and how it was my fault that I hadn't come by to appreciate it. Hilarious, because my favorite band was a dissonant, sweary post-punk group that can be very hard to listen to. It wasn't long after that I moved several hundred miles away for school, which of course I didn't tell the cashier. When he found out I left, he sent me a number of tirades about how cruel I had been not to give him a chance. Then the typical nice guy paradoxes of my being a frigid slut. Then that I was racist for not wanting to date him. And then he said that he was just going to quit his job and move to Brazil to get over this betrayal. I ended up deleting my MySpace in favor of Facebook shortly thereafter. So that was 10 years ago. I recently found a message in my other inbox from this guy on Facebook asking if I was who he thought I was. My name on Facebook is my first name plus not my last name. Profile photo is of me and a group of people hiking.